Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
My name is Lucy Sanders, and I'm the CEO of the National Center for Women and Information Technology. And if you can't get that phrase out of your mouth, you are not alone. So we say NCWIT for short, and really happy to welcome you here. As a computer scientist myself and also a former high-tech industry executive, I know firsthand the power of technology to transform our lives, our society, our corporations, and our world. And as an inventor, I believe passionately that diverse thought informs invention. And all the design teams that I was on that were diverse in nature produced products that were more creative, more robust, and more applicable to a wide range of human needs. And so I'm not the only one that thinks that. There are a lot of people in this auditorium today that believe the same thing as I do. And over 70 universities and corporations and nonprofits are part of the NCWIT coalition, working on significantly increasing the meaningful participation of girls and women in information technology. Innovation is one of our fundamental cornerstones, and that's why we are so happy to be able to co-host this important town hall on innovation with our partner, the National Science Foundation, and my most able planning partner, Jan Cuny. Oh, thank you.
I'm Jan Cuny. I'm a professor of computer science at the University of Oregon. And for the last year and a half and the next year and a half, I will be at the National Science Foundation, where I run the SCIES, that's the Computing Science Directorate. I run their program on broadening participation in computing. And it's a really terrific experience for me to be able to co-host this with NCWIT and Lucy and bring both of those communities together. The broadening participation in computer science. In computing, we work with women, but also underrepresented minorities and persons with disabilities. So this meeting represents all of those communities. I think it's a really timely and important meeting to have. I think there's a lot of discussion about innovation, and we're not going to be able to meet our science and engineering goals if we continue to fail to engage 70% of our population, 70% or more, and that part of the population is growing. We have to reach beyond that if we're going to be successful innovators in the future global economy. So I am delighted to welcome you all here. I'd like to turn the podium over to Bill Wolf, who is the president of the National Academy of Engineers.
Thank you, Jan. And, it is a real pleasure to be able to host this NCWIT NSF Town Hall on Women in Engineering. I would like to say just a few words about the Academy, since many people don't quite understand what we are. We are a private 501c3 not-for-profit corporation, but it happens that we incorporated in the District of Columbia in 1863 at a time when there was no city government. And so the federal government acted as the city government. So our corporate charter is actually a bill that passed through Congress and was signed by Abraham Lincoln. Understand, please, that any corporation formed in 1863 in the District of Columbia would have gotten exactly the same treatment. What is important is that somebody added about 40 words to what is otherwise an absolutely boilerplate corporate charter. And those 40 words, in essence, say that the Academy is chartered to be both an honorific organization. That is, it is an honor to be elected. You can't join. You have to be elected by the existing membership. It's generally considered to be the highest honor that can be bestowed upon an engineer by his or her peers. And we are to act as advisors to the government on issues of science and technology. And that's actually most of what I do. We get asked questions. We form committees. Those committees serve pro bono, typically for 18 months. and write a report which is 200 or 300 pages long, fact-based, absolutely, we're not interested in people's opinions, very tightly reasoned, and we produce one of those reports every working day. So that's the bulk of our activity. It's in the context of our advisory role to the government and to the nation more broadly as a whole that puts an edge on my concern for the lack of women and underrepresented minorities in engineering in particular, information technology in particular. We just issued a report called Rising Above the Gathering Storm. It was issued in draft form last fall. That was addressed to answer a question from Congress about what the country needs to do in order to prosper in the 21st century. And the first part of the answer to that is an educated workforce, a better educated workforce. It's the one irreducible requirement for prospering in the next century. And that we have to consider both the size and the quality of that workforce. And obviously, the subject of this town meeting, namely the consequences of the lack of representation of women in particular, but underrepresented minorities as well, in the information technology workforce, puts a limiting factor on the size. But I'd like to also argue that it puts a limiting factor on the quality. Lucy actually said this, but let me just say it again very quickly. Engineering, computer science are profoundly creative activities. There's a quote from an aeronautical engineer, a fellow by the name of Theodore von Karman, taught at Caltech in the late 40s, early 50s, that I'm very fond of. Mostly I don't think it makes a lot of sense to draw fine distinctions between engineering and science. But occasionally, people like me bounce back and forth along that spectrum all the time. But it's occasionally useful to define what the endpoints of that spectrum are. What von Karman said was that science is about understanding nature, understanding what is. Engineering is about creating what has never been. Okay? Understanding versus creating. Back in the 50s, there was a burst of interest in the psychology community about what makes for creativity. The question on the table was, could creativity be taught? And of course, psychologists never agree with each other on anything, but the general consensus of the papers that I've read is that creativity is all about making unexpected connections between things you already know. And you can actually teach yourself techniques for exposing those unexpected connections. But it's the things you already know, the set of life experiences that you've had, that are very difficult to change. One of the things that I believe very deeply is that men, women, underrepresented minorities, the handicapped, experience life differently. They have different sets of life experiences. And I think of those life experiences sort of as the gene pool for creativity. So when you have a diverse team, you have a richer set of experiences, a richer set of knowledge upon which to build those unexpected connections. And consequently, a diverse team will produce a better product, will find a more elegant solution, will find a better process. So you came here to talk about the size of the IT workforce, but I also urge you to think about the quality of the workforce. So now it's my pleasure to introduce the mayor of this town forum, Rick Ratchet, Senior VP in charge of all of Microsoft Research. Rick has been at Microsoft since 1991. He founded their research activities. Before he went to Microsoft, he and I overlapped a little bit as faculty at Carnegie Mellon University. If you want to remember just one thing about Rick, when he was at CMU, he wrote the kernel of an operating system called Mach, which is essentially the heart of every commercial operating system in existence today. I don't care whether you talk about Windows or the Mac OS. So, Rick Ratchet.
Well, I want to thank you all for being here. I am the unelected mayor of our town hall. I'm going to try to get things moving, and I think we're going to have a very interesting and exciting day. Let me just say a few words about what we're doing to kind of set the stage for the conversations that we're going to be having. And I hope it's going to be a really vibrant conversation, not just from the people here on the stage, but with everyone here in the audience. First of all, when most people think about information technology and they say, what does it mean to say information technology? They'll usually say, well, it's about the technology that sort of creates information, stores, exchanges, manages information of all sorts of kinds. And that's fine. And it's a perfectly good definition. Some people will say it's about computers and software and communication. And that's a perfectly good definition, too. But I think there's another way of thinking about it. And it sort of came to me a couple of years ago when I was in London with one of my sons who, coincidentally, is going to be graduating in computer science next month from the University of Washington. And I was there with him, taking him around London a bit, and one of the places I took him to was the British Science Museum. And for those of you who know the British Science Museum, one of its great attractions for computer scientists is Babbage's machine. And so this is one of the very early designs for a computing engine. They've built a version of it, and it's available. It actually does work. I've actually seen it function up in the Science Museum. So I wanted to take him there. I thought every computer scientist, aspiring computer scientist at least, should see this. But on the way to see Babbage's machine, you walk through an area which has a really exquisite collection of steam engines. Big steam engines, little steam engines. I see people nodding who remember the Science Museum. And I saw that, and I started to think about it, and I realized there was a time in England, probably all of Europe, when the answer to every question was a steam engine. You can just imagine the project meetings people would have. They'd sit down and they'd say, okay, we need a steam engine, right? And really, today, information technology plays that same role for us. More often than not, if you're going to solve a problem, the first thing you're going to sit down and do is say, okay, well, we'll need a processor, we're going to need software, we're going to need to start pulling these things together, we're going to need a communication network. That's the way we think about solving our problems. That's our steam engine, and that's the role information technology plays. It's been a huge factor in the United States in terms of our competitiveness. If you think about the investments that the U.S. government made over the 60s, 70s, and 80s in the field of computer science and information technology, those have paid off incredibly handsomely. We have more than a dozen billion-dollar industries that came out of those investments, and companies worth well over $1 trillion in market value. And we're building new ones every day, it seems. There continues to be great amount of innovation going into the economy. Clearly, we're having an impact in other areas as well. The entire economy is benefiting from information technology by allowing it to be more efficient, to get its work done better, to re-engineer itself. And by various estimates, something like a quarter of all U.S. productivity gains have come from the information technology that has come out of these investments. But there's another way to look at it, and again, I'll use a personal example. I was in Europe last year at an innovation event in Brussels. So this is a European Union innovation event. And one of the speakers there had, I thought, a really interesting comment to make. He said, we in Europe, felt like in the early 90s we were catching up to the United States. You know, we thought we were really on the path. And then all of a sudden, in the mid to late 1990s, you guys sort of took off and went on to a different gear. And the U.S. economy changed in its character in a significant way. And again, it was information technology that's driving that. And obviously the point of that conversation in Europe was partly to look at how they could try to benefit from some of those things. I know at Microsoft, you know, we believe that focusing on building basic research in the field of information technology, which is really my organization, has been an enormous value to us. I mean, we've invested a lot. We've built an organization over the last almost 15 years now. Seems like it was just yesterday. That has been a huge factor in Microsoft's ability to go into new areas and to continue to compete. So it's important to us. Information technology is a driver of the economy. It's a driver for competitiveness. One thing that people don't often say, it's also a driver of the sciences in general. Increasingly, all the sciences depend on information technology, not just to provide the tools required to get their work done, but really to change the nature of the way they do their work. You know, you would talk about the notion of experimental science and theoretical science. Now there's really a third category. It's how you conduct science when you're able to do simulation and analysis. It's that space in between pure theory and pure experiment, where you're able to understand data, to look out at possibilities, to simulate the real world, to find new ways of thinking about or solving problems. And increasingly, the underlying theory and notions associated with computer science and information technology are being adopted in other fields. If you sit and listen to Lee Hood give a speech on his work in genetics, it sounds more and more every year like a computer science talk. You talk about systems biology, it doesn't sound that different to me than operating systems that I'm used to. Well, that's great. Information technology is important. It's a driver of our economy. It's a driver of our competitiveness. But we have a problem. And that is that over the next, 10 years, there's going to be a huge growth in our field. The Labor Department has said that predicted something like 1.5 million new jobs in the IT sector by 2012. And yet, as we're standing here or sitting here, the numbers of students going into computer science and some of the other related areas of engineering is going down. I mean, last year's Talby report showed that there was another 15% drop in undergraduate computer science majors. That now means that roughly 50%, there's roughly been a 50% drop in the total number of computer science majors from the peak in 2000. I mean, it's just a tremendous drop-off. It's causing companies like Microsoft and Google and Intel to look carefully at what we're doing and how we're doing it, because we don't see how we're going to be able to fill the positions that we will be having in the future. Now, one of the problems our field has had, and Bill alluded to this in his talk, is that we have not had the participation of a large part of the population in the information technology field. I mean, something just a little bit less than 20% of those who graduate in the computer science and engineering area are women. And the numbers are declining. The interest by women in computer science has fallen to really a low that hasn't been seen since 1972. There's a report out of UCLA that tracks the interest of incoming freshmen in particular fields. Computer science has now dropped down among women to an incredibly low level. And really, there wasn't much computer science in 1972. So that's a problem. But it's also an opportunity for us. I mean, if we can find ways of bringing women and underrepresented minorities into the field of information technology, if we can increase the diversity of our field, we have the opportunity to really engage a much broader collection of smart people in the work that we're doing. We can try to bridge that skills gap that is looming out in the future. So I think what we're here to do today is to talk about ways in which we can address concerns of diversity, the role that diversity can play in making the field of information technology a more vibrant field. I know at Microsoft, we look at diversity not just as a question of numbers, but also, as Bill was remarking, it's really an issue of what kinds of products do you want to build. You want different perspectives. You want different backgrounds. You want people with different ways of thinking to design and build your products so that you can engage with a broader collection of consumers and customers. You want to build better products, and the best way to do that is to have a diverse workforce. And we've been trying to work to do that, but it is an issue that the whole field has, and we need to be able to address. Well, with that said, this town hall is really the first to try to explore this issue in a comprehensive way. We've brought together a number of very distinguished thought leaders, really people from the front lines of academia, nonprofits, industry, government. And the goal today is to really get a conversation going, to set the stage, to say, what could we do? What are some of the opportunities? What are some of the ways in which we can make a difference? All right, with that as an introduction, I'd like to now introduce our very first speaker for today. Padmasree Warrior is an Executive Vice President and Chief Technology Officer for Motorola, where she directs that company's R&D efforts and has operational responsibility for Motorola Labs, the Global Software Group, and the emerging early-stage businesses. She's been passionate about industry initiatives, including supporting the work of NC-WIT and other similar organizations. She received the Women Elevating Science and Technology Award from Working Woman magazine in 2001, and today she's going to be speaking to us on the future of technology and the criticality of diverse thought in innovation. Padmasree?
Thank you, Rick. Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to really be here and talk to you about two subjects that I'm most passionate about, technology and diverse thought, and how one feeds the other. And I really feel that it is an interrelated theme, and hopefully we will discuss and debate some things we can do to make that interlinkage much more tighter than it is today. So to begin with, what I thought I would do is sort of give you my view and structure my this dialogue into three buckets. Talk a little bit about the future of technology, where we see technology headed, perhaps in a little broader sense than strictly information technology. But as Rick pointed out to me, information technology is nothing but an underpinning of many of the things that we will be doing with technology in the future. So I'll start off with that. Then I'll talk a little bit about why diversity is important to technology. I think it's not just a feel-good phrase anymore, just to say we need more women in technology, we need more women in information technology. It really is a business imperative. I'll talk to you a little bit from my experience leading the R&D organization for Motorola, not just from a global perspective, but specifically within the US, some of the things that we can do. And then we will end the session with a dialogue and a Q&A. So let me start off with talking a little bit about where I think technology is headed. Before we talk about the technology trends, one of the things that I believe in is really to look for precursors, not necessarily trends, but precursors that allow us to create the next big disruption. So whenever I go to speak, people always ask me, and I'm sure it's the same for the other speakers that opened the session before me, so what's going to be the next big thing, right? And so it's as if we have a crystal ball that we can all answer what's the next big thing is going to be. If I knew that, I wouldn't be working for Motorola, I'd be doing something else. But I think the important thing is to really look for precursors that sort of identify what could be some disruptions that we can create together as an industry. So let me start off with that. In the IT world, as you know, technology moves at a very rapid pace. Mainframes and PCs revolutionized our world and allowed us to have a lot more capability than we did before that. And I think Rick said, before 72, there was no computer science as a field. So that really happened in the 70s and 80s. Following that, it was really the network and the internet. In between somewhere there was a client-server architecture, and companies that adapted one or the other benefited. Those that didn't were sort of left in the wayside. Following that was network and the internet capabilities. The next big wave, I believe, is going to be wireless and mobility. And by that, I don't mean just cell phones. Wireless and mobility means how do we take the capability that we currently have on the internet, on a computer, and make it much more mobile. Now, why do I believe that there are precursors to support that need? If you think about what is driving mobility and the capability and the globalization and the blurring of the boundaries between what we defined previously as work and home and being out there, those boundaries are getting blurred. Today, we expect to have the capabilities that we have on a PC with us wherever we go, right? And I kind of jokingly ask this at every conference that I speak to, how many of us, maybe this audience may be different, how many of us really use a PC to compute per se? I think we use a PC really more as a portal to give us information, entertainment, give us music, give us video, give us search capabilities, give us advertisements, all of these things. I'm an engineer, and I hardly use my PC to compute. And I think that is really the crux of what's happening. As more and more capability goes into it, and we get adapted to using that capability, there's an expectation on the consumer's part that that capability will go with us. So I want the internet to follow me rather than me follow the internet. So one of the things that we think, and I think the future is really going to be all about, is creating this mobile internet. So from an information technology point of view, what are some things that we can do to drive that, enable that in the future of technology? So now let me specifically talk about, so that's the demand side, right? Everything I've said so far is driving the demand for the internet to go, or the mobile internet, or whatever you call it, the capabilities to be mobile. With a difference, though. If you think about how we use the internet, sitting at a desk or sitting in a Starbucks or wherever, it's very different from how we would expect those capabilities to be delivered to us when we are moving around. Typically, when we are sitting in front of a computer, working on it, using the information, our attention is very focused. The screen is fairly large, and our hands are free, and we are devoid of distractions and noise to the most part, other than, I have a teenage son. He seems to be wanting all the distractions. But other than that, usually our attention is focused, our hands are free, we can type. However, when we are mobile, it's just the opposite. Usually we have something we are carrying in our hand, sometimes one hand, more often both hands. We are driving or in a train or in a bus or at the airport. Usually there's a lot of noise in the surroundings, so voice recognition and having multimodal interaction with the internet becomes very key. And the third thing is the screen is fairly small compared to, they're getting larger and larger, but compared to what we are used to on a PC and a television, it's much smaller. So when we say we want the internet to be mobile, we are really looking at a huge opportunity for innovation. And I think that's where the experts in this room and the experts that hopefully we will create in the industry can drive and invent and innovate, and US can really lead the way in this, because no other country and no other industry has really figured this out. So another interesting dynamic of all of this demand side that is driving businesses, large and small, to do is sort of whether you think of it as a convergence or a collision. Depends on your perspective to occur, right? All of a sudden, we always have this debate within Motorola. We have a strong partnership with Microsoft. But are they a partner, or will they compete with us, right? Why is that? Because IT industry, the computing industry, is now able to deliver voice. And, as things get digitized, you can packetize them, and the network is going to be IP-driven, and packets can be moved around. And so there's really no difference anymore in the future between voice and data and music and video. So that is driving a collision between business models and industries, where now we are seeing sort of a merging between consumer electronics industry, computing industry, communications industry, and really communications, consumer, and content industries, and sort of all kind of coming together. So brings up an interesting debate about, so what will the technologies underlying that will drive this convergence or collision, depending on your perspective. So the first thing that is, I think, will enable that to happen is the intelligence in the devices, in the mobile devices in particular, is increasing at an exponential rate. Started off, these devices had very limited capability. Today they have stereophonic surround sound that you can have on a mobile platform, whether it's a cell phone with additional capabilities to email and music, or whether it's a music device added voice capabilities, or whatever the case may be. There's a lot of memory, there's a lot of storage, there's a lot of processing power in these things. So now it becomes easy to connect devices to each other with very little human interaction. So there's more innovation needed in short-range communications. How do you drive a lot of bandwidth in very short distance, where I can now use this device to make payments and buy things, etc. So short-range technologies, starting with Bluetooth but leading to ultra-wideband and other technologies, will have to be merged with traditional IT types of technologies, where we can have networking across different protocols to occur seamlessly. The second trend we see, and I touched on this a little bit, is digitization. That really started with data, and then moved to music, but now video, and as things get digitized, we can now have the experiences that we used to have in a mobile environment in a much more easier fashion, in a much more secure fashion, which brings up the issue of how do you make these things secure, especially when you move from wired technologies to wireless and driving the convergence between these two. Security becomes a very key enabler in the future. Again, a lot of room for innovation and enhancements there. The third trend really is the pervasiveness of broadband. And we are kind of seeing that happen already, right? Broadband is now becoming available and affordable, and many cities are now actually deploying even disruptions like Muni Wi-Fi, starting with Philadelphia and now Chicago and San Francisco. So there will be pockets of providing connectivity using different types of technologies to drive us to have the connectivity that we are looking for. So those are some major trends in terms of the networking and computing/communications areas. In the area of content, also very interesting new trends that we are seeing. Content, if you think about when I was growing up, and I grew up in India, content was something that was given to me. I really had no choice of what was presented to me. Content was delivered to me, and in fact delivered at me. And most of it was through newspapers or magazines in some case, and whatever was in that newspaper or magazine was all I was exposed to, and all I could hope to be exposed to. That changed with the television, where the experience of just passively consuming the content somewhat changed, and it became more realistic. We could experience things in a different way. We could feel like we are part of it. And with the internet, that really opened the world even more, where I'm now actually searching for the information that I want and looking for the content that I'm interested in, rather than just consuming passively whatever's given to me. So content delivery is moved from being very much here's the content to much more personalized content, and you're seeing more and more of that. We are seeing more and more of that through podcasts and other things now. And as a result of that, content consumption patterns are also changing. And if you think about content, I like to think about content in different ways, right? There's difference between how we, if you think of voice, for example, as a variation of content. Typically, when we are talking to someone, we want it to be real time. When I call someone, whether I'm using Skype or whether I'm using a cell phone or I'm making a VoIP call, I would like it to be instantaneous with no latency, and I call someone, the person responds, and we talk. And I'd like the voice quality to be very good. I don't want it to be mechanized. I don't want my voice to sound stochastic, and I want it to be a real experience. Whereas with music, another kind of content, the experience is somewhat different. I usually know what kind of music artists that I like, what genre I like. If it's jazz, I know what artists I like. And I want to get that music, not necessarily maybe the entire album, but a few songs. But more or less, sometimes I would like to get the content from an entire artist as well. So I'm pretty selective, and I'm choosing the content. It doesn't need to be real time. I can have some delay in downloading the content. I can cache it. I can carry it with me and listen to it. Whereas with video, it's even different. And I think video tends to be both information as well as entertainment. So if it's news, for example, it's more perishable content, and we would like it to be real time. Something happened, the tsunami occurred, I want to know about it now. I don't want to have a delay. So how do we deliver that kind of content in a quick fashion in a mobile and internet, in the mobile internet world? Whereas there's other kinds of content like movies and so forth, where I'm not really searching for a movie. I'm not sure if I'm going to like a movie or not, but it's more word of mouth. Somebody may tell me such and such a movie is good. I don't remember the title, and then I'm going to go look for it. So there's different kinds of content, and I think one of the future trends is really going to be how do we make this content available to people, and what kinds of IT technologies are needed to provide this content to be pervasive and customized and personalized on different platforms that are important for us, that we can carry with us and that we can have access to. So that's, in a nutshell, where I wanted to talk a little bit about the future of technology. So what does all that mean, and how is that relevant to diversity and globalization? I don't want to stand up here and talk about globalization because so much has been written and said about it. I'm sure many of you have been part of one debate or another. So rather than talk about globalization, in my view, that's an old debate, we should be talking about the implications of it. So what do we do about it, and what does that mean? And I'm a very optimistic person. I always look at the glass as half full rather than half empty. One of the things that I think globalization allows us to do is actually drive a lot of opportunity, business opportunity as well as technical opportunity to be innovative. Why do I say that? If you think about emerging markets, the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, their GDP growth is somewhere between 6 to 8%. And there's a lot of people still out there that are unconnected, even today, that don't have access to any kinds of communication or information. And cost points have to be fairly low. And so how do we, as an industry, as a country, enable that to happen? Where, in fact, by making the world flatter rather than less flat, we can take advantage of the demographic differences and create new businesses and new business models and new kinds of technical disruptions to drive that to happen. The other, I think, opportunity that globalization allows us to do is to really think about multimodality, right? In these markets, large markets as they are, in India and China, for example, and I grew up in India, there is still a lot of illiteracy, and people cannot read and write, unfortunately. But they have a need for information, they have a need for communication. Now, how do we do that? And so how do we do, for example, very sophisticated text-to-speech translation and multimodality with icons and so forth that make it easier? So a lot of IT-based technical innovation is needed in terms of driving the application side of the information technology equation. So I think those are things that we should pursue, which then brings us to the topic of diversity. And what is the power of diverse thought in driving these innovations? So if you look at countries like sub-Saharan Africa, and whether we are looking at a market such as India, like I mentioned, or China, or Brazil, or Russia, or even actually in rural US, where connectivity is still not available, where you can deploy fixed wireless broadband kinds of technology to provide broadband. It's very important that we look at it from a very diverse perspective and make sure we are taking into account the importance of the market dynamics as well as the technological innovation. So just to give you an example, speaking from personal experience, most of you probably know, maybe I should ask this, how many of you own or have heard of the Motorola Razr phone? Okay, good. So it's considered to be a really iconic device, and I'm not here to sell our products, but I think I want to bring that out as an example of something that we did. It was almost a innovation that required different kinds of skill sets to work together, because we decided we wanted to make a very thin phone and to solve an old problem, actually a very simple problem, that cell phones were not comfortable to carry in a shirt pocket or a suit pocket. They were too bulky. So we said, okay, how do we solve that problem? Let's make a thin phone. It required engineering ingenuity because we had to figure out how to put the antenna inside. It required design folks to come up with using aircraft-grade aluminum as the shield for it instead of plastic, because it'll break if it's too thin, you slip in your back pocket, you sit on it, we didn't want the phone to be breaking. And it required software capabilities to be different, and the keypad had to be totally done differently. So for the first time, we actually pulled together diverse people from different functions and different capabilities to come out with a product like the Razr. But the story doesn't end there, and this brings me to the point of women and why it's so important and what skill set we bring that adds a different dimension to it. The first Razr we did was a silver-colored, metallic-looking device, and it was very popular. We gained a lot of market share. And I was in a review with our design team, and I said, we should do this device in pink. So everybody looked at me, and they thought, pink phone? So I said, yeah, I think we should do it in pink. So they said, no, we're going to do one in black. So we did one in black. So I kept going back and said, no, let's do one in pink, really. I think this will be great for Mother's Day and Valentine's Day. Let's do a pink phone. So we did one, and we did very few to begin with. And we got Maria Sharapova to be our sponsor for the device. And it was so successful, then now we have actually 4 different shades of pink. So all of a sudden, Motorola's marketing team wisened up, and now we have a women's business council that advises our design teams on different colors and different branding of these products. And we just did a device that's a Dolce & Gabbana limited edition. And how many men in this room would have thought of that idea? So I think the point of telling you that anecdotally is that I think everyone looks at things from a different perspective, and women actually make up, and I think the statistics that I read in the information that I was picking up outside, women make up a large part of the buying power in this country, and sort of Hispanics, and Yahoo and Microsoft actually have launched their websites now in Spanish language to cater to the Hispanic population in the U.S. And there is a need, there's a market need, and so the business justification why having women and underrepresented minorities in designing products is so powerful. And just to finish the story, the Dolce & Gabbana one, we did only a few. We did 1,000 because we wanted it to be very exclusive, and I heard they're selling on eBay for $1,000, and that was a woman's idea, not mine, but another woman's idea at Motorola. So I think that it's extremely important. And as we think about the technology and where it's headed, it's really merging together different capabilities from IT computing industry and communications industry, content and consumer. It really becomes important that we figure out how do we encourage more women to get into these fields, and I think we have to start there, right? I think we have to start at the undergrad and graduate student level. So everybody in this room has to play a strong role in encouraging women to pursue these fields. And I serve on the engineering council for Cornell University, which is where I graduated from, and I was recently at the council meeting. And one of the interesting statistics is there are a lot more women now applying to the fields of computer science and engineering to get into the undergraduate program. For some reason, though, they don't choose those fields. And so why is that? So it's as if that women are interested, they want to explore, but they're not willing to commit and get into the undergraduate program. And the problem just gets worse as you go into the graduate level and so forth. So is it that we need to position these fields to be more attractive to women, or is it that we need to brand them differently? I'm not sure what the answer is, and hopefully that's something that we will talk through in the dialogue. I think that's an area that we have to work on. The second area is really for companies such as Motorola and Microsoft and others to do targeted recruiting. Go to schools, and we do this. We try to do it. I can't say we are perfect at it, and try to recruit women to join and take up careers in IT and in engineering and technology. But actually what we found in Motorola is even if we are able to improve our statistics and data in how many women we attract to come into the company, typically after 2 years we see a high turnover rate. And once they stay beyond two years, then it gets better, and then again in the mid-manager level it peaks. It's very interesting actually. So entry level we attract a lot of people. After a couple of years we see a lot of turnover. Then it stabilizes, and then after they get to director level we see another huge turnover. And so how do we prevent that? And I think one of the things we need to do within the company is to create an environment where we can foster inclusivity. And it's not just being, I don't think women just want to be part of the solution. I think we want to be able to make it where they are adding value, right? I mean, I think the example I gave with the Razr, we're actually creating a market and we're driving innovation and driving very creative thought because you think of things from a very different perspective. So how can companies do that? I think that's the role that industry can play. And I think once we do that, and really, sessions like this, I really applaud NC WIT to be hosting this, is to really take these issues seriously and have a dialogue. And more important than the dialogue is to come up with a set of actions that we can each follow up on and measure ourselves to. Next year when we come back, we should look at a metric and say, did that metric move one way or another? And I think that way we hold each of ourselves accountable to what we are trying to accomplish. So with that, I think I am done, and we will now open up to a dialogue. I'd like Rick to come back up here.
So Pabasri, thank you very much. I appreciate your comments. We do want to now open up for questions or comments. I see microphones in the aisles here, so if you can, please go to a microphone.
Someone has to start it off. I do have a question. Within Motorola, which is, I guess, your experience, are there any programs that you would highlight that Motorola did, and I know they've done an enormous amount over the years, really made a difference? And then there might be others, if you're willing to say, that sounded like a great idea, but seemed to have no impact.
Yeah. So I think a couple of things come to mind. One of the things is we participate in MentorNet, which is a mentoring program using the internet. That has actually been very successful. Remember I said we were seeing a lot of attrition in the early stages when women enter the workforce. That seemed to help a lot. And so I would say that had reasonable amount of success. The other thing we do inside the company is we have diversity business councils. So there's a working women's business council. And what the business council tries to do is create a community within the corporation of women, and it's all voluntary. It's grassroots effort. And we do it by site. That gives input on what kind of products would women like and what kind of, and because now we are becoming more of a consumer company, maybe it's getting more traction now than it did 5 years ago. So the conversation has moved from, I would say, in this business council from, gee, diversity is important, we should do something about it, right, to really what is it? What is it? Why is it important? And what is the business proposition? And it's no longer a debate about is it the right thing to do or not. It's how do we get that done. A couple of things that have not been successful is when things are forced top down. When we say that you have to have a certain number of women hired at a certain level, then I've seen those things fail miserably within the corporation. And in fact, I think it has a negative impact on people that are underrepresented rather than a positive impact.
I just wanted to say that I thought it was interesting when you told the story about the Razr phone. The way you start off was there was a need to design a thin phone to put into a shirt pocket. Well, most women don't put their phones in their shirt pocket.
Right after my
In fact, if there was an opportunity to think about ways to create these devices that fit into my bra or in my front jean pocket, I'd be there.
Perfect. She's a woman after my heart. So you should actually see my purse. That's exactly true. Most women I know, I don't want to generalize, don't wear devices. I never You see me carrying my phone. I don't put it on anything. I have nothing to put it on. So I think we are working on things that are more wearable, and we call them wearable devices. So it's not, so you don't want to wear something like this as beautiful as it is, right? And so we're working on accessories that you might carry with a device like this, but we're thinking about, for example, having a bracelet or something that's unobtrusive that women and we're doing things, segmented marketing to drive that, but that's an excellent point.
Hi, I'm Andrea Fuller with the Round Peg Group. And I'm curious as to the drop-off you mentioned after the first 2 years of employment. How much of that is due to women not feeling included versus women dropping out to have children and feeling that the flexibility might not be there to do both?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I don't think we've ever been able to identify, tried to get data to say, why is it that we are having the higher attrition? I mean, attrition is higher after 2 years for the whole workforce. I mean, even men leave. And I think that's just because they get experience in the industry, they get hired away. So in general, it tends to be higher, but we lose women and minorities at a faster rate. I'm not exactly sure why that is. I think we've not able to pinpoint the exact reason for it. I wish I could say why that is. We are, I think, I'm not sure whether it's flexibility, because flexibility means so many different things for different people. I think it's not just telecommuting. It's not, it's none of those things, because we tried all of those and it still didn't have an impact. It may bring the total number down, but the percentage still tends to be higher. So I can't say we know the reason why.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Dennis Anderson from Pace University. Over the last year, I've been working with Microsoft and the Society for Information Management, and we started a program called the Future Potential in IT to address what Rick already mentioned about the enrollment issue that we have in computer science and IT in general. And one of the things that I observed, from this project is that we're not really getting to the high school, even junior high school. A lot of people that I talk to, we have to get to as early as a junior high school to address the problem, whether it's women in IT or IT in general. Right now, there's a lot of perception out there that IT jobs and career are going overseas, and we're trying to address that issue with this project. So how do we get to as early as possible? So that's something that I'd like you to address.
Okay. I'll give my perspective and then Rick jump in. I think that's very true, and I have a 13-year-old son, so I can really relate to this. I think it's not just I think at that stage, it's not just a women's issue. It's how do you encourage school children, right, at junior, actually even elementary school, to really get interested in math and science as subjects that are very important. And I see the U.S. falling behind in this area because, I have a global team and I visit a lot of the other countries and do work in universities and schools in other countries as well, and I see us falling behind. I think there's several things we can do, and I think we have a program in Motorola, a couple of programs that we support, where we have a program called After School Matters, and so we support that, which several schools participate, and we kind of take our products and our engineers go there and they talk about how technology really can be fun and cool. And I think you have to relate to children at that level where they don't just see it as, gee, if I do this, then I'm not going to get a job. I think the other myth that we have to bust after that is really, if you think about math and science at that level, right, and then I'll talk about IT, I think IT choices get made at a later stage, at high school perhaps or in college. But at elementary school, junior high, we're talking really about getting kids interested in math and science. One of the things that I do when I go to talk to school children is really give examples of how science and technology plays a role in simple things like cosmetics, toys, and games. Gaming is all about computer science and technology. So I think that's one way we have to make it relevant to the children. The other thing we need to do is to make sure that our teachers have the resources that they need to have. One of the things that we, again, do as a company is use Motorola retirees, people that have retired from the company, to work with school teachers, math and science teachers, to help them get their skill sets to be at a higher level. And I'm sure Microsoft does several things, too.
Yeah, I think there was a study that was done in British Columbia a few years ago where it specifically identified the sort of junior high school period as a period during which a number of young women decided that they really were not going to be interested in math, or they weren't, or that they weren't good at math or engineering, even though they actually were. There's something sort of social going on there that is really turning these young people off to the field. Microsoft, we do have some programs as well. We have something called DigiGirls. That's a program to try to get young women in high school interested in technology and science. And I think there's obviously a lot more that we can do as an industry, and there's probably more that can be done on the government side as well. But it is a big issue, and it's not, it's sort of all the way from the generation side, so very early on, trying to get more underrepresented minorities and women into the sort of engineering and science areas in junior high school and high school. But as has been already discussed, we still, even if we got them all into college, it's not really clear we could get them out the other end. Or if we got them all into our businesses, it's not clear that we're doing a good job of retaining. So I think there's a bunch of issues there that have to be resolved. Over here.
Farris. I'm with the Catalyst Institute for Applied Policy. The 3 comments. One relates to time, the other relates to a corporate role, and the third relates to cultural flows. Regarding time, we tend to solve problems today with what's in front of us, and we continue solving the same problem over and over again because we haven't looked at the time perspective. We've got to make room in our minds for tomorrow's things. I'm quite old, actually, and I have some young people working for me, and I listen to them speak, and their language has changed. There are all kinds of things going on in the generations to come that we are not even considering. Women may no longer be an issue in 10 years. And another aspect of time has to do with the kids in kindergarten and dealing with them so that this problem gets solved and we can move on to another human challenge. Regarding the role of corporations, I was at an event where there was a young woman training to be a vet, and part of their training was rotations in the veterinary industry, various aspects of it. That industry is accustomed to being involved in training the workforce coming along. American industry is in general not. And they don't like having trainees in their path because it's inefficient. The Germans have a whole system of guilds where their corporations are accustomed to and assume responsibility for training the people who are coming along. This is not necessarily related to women. It's a general American problem. But we have to find a way to build the corporations into solving this problem. Not mentors, but on-staff trainees who are we need a position in American industry, which is that of a person, a working person who's paid, who's got a badge and stuff, coming along to be whatever it is we're trying to create in the economy. And regarding cultural flows, there's a reason why there are underrepresented populations. There's a reason why women are in the position that they're in. And there are conflicts in our culture about what we want to do about that. Time may solve that problem, but I don't think we can ignore them because, again, the problem will not get solved. And do we want to alter our culture? Is there something wrong with the culture that brings this problem about, such that addressing the problem will cause damage to ourselves as a people? It's a challenging kind of a construct, but I think we have to think about it in those terms. We create values and give those values to children that say there's something wrong with a woman not being a scientist, or there's something wrong with the position of a servant, and that kind of thing. The value judgments that we make as we proceed, I think we need to be conscious of, so that we don't, create that kind of tension. Okay? And I believe, if I may make a side comment here, that the artist is the key person that we have to bring to the table in this conversation so that those cultural challenges can be creatively addressed.
So I think great point. Let me summarize. I think I heard 2 themes there, and one theme was how do U.S. corporations get more engaged at the school level to have people? No, more.
Not school level.
Okay.
I'm finished with school and I'm now going
okay.
And it's a continuity, they're not at the school level.
people. So I think, there's things like internships that we do. Recently, we launched a competition for people that are, I think, at undergrad level in universities to say, think about the future and think about what would technology look like. And it was a broad question. And we encouraged anybody in any discipline to participate in it. So they didn't necessarily have to be engineers or scientists. They could be in cinema. They could be any creative art, and they submitted their entry, whether it was a video or written story or whatever. And I think that type of thing, and that's just one example, engages our youth. I think youth that's thinking about where they want to go, more in the economy, what needs to be done in technology and so forth. And your other comment about the culture, I totally agree. I think it has to start from within.
Okay, I think we only have time, unfortunately, for about one more question. You've been standing there the longest. You want to go ahead?
Okay, well, I have two quick questions.
Okay, next person.
All right, the first one is, why do top-down approaches not work? So why is it if you say something from the top that doesn't go down to the bottom? And the second question is, you're a chemical engineer by training, and chemical engineering is not necessarily a glamorous field or one that's in the popular media a lot, but they seem to have made a lot more progress in terms of attracting women, in terms of underrepresented groups. So what do you think is different about computer science, information technology? Is there something about the culture within these groups? Is there something that can change? I mean, because it seems like math and science, all engineering fields have issues, but it seems like computer science, we're one of the few fields where we're regressing over the time. So I'm kind of curious what you think about that.
So two questions, so two quick answers, and it is not set in concrete, so it's my perspective, my opinion. I think the reason that if the initiative is only top-driven, top-down, I think we don't get the buy-in of the people to, I think it's a middle layer that always tends to be a problem, right? At CEO level or a CXO level, people may say, gee, diversity is important, I want to drive it, I want my organization to be more inclusive. At the working grassroots level, there's a buy-in. But if the middle layer doesn't get bought in, there's usually a barrier that people hit. And if you force it too hard, they'll do it, but it's just a token thing just to please the boss. It's not something that people really believe in. So that's what we found. We really had to increase the awareness of the middle layer of managers who are leading teams to really sort of buy into it and be part of it. So hopefully that answers your first question. The second question had to do with chemical engineering. I think this is my perspective. I think what disciplines such as chemical engineering and materials have done is really reinvent themselves. If you think, my background is actually in chemical engineering. My degree is in chemical engineering, but my background is in electronic materials. The way they did it, if you think about chemical engineering back when I went to school, it was really about petrochemical industry, large-scale plastics industry, and so forth, which there was not a huge amount of growth back then. What that discipline tended to do was make itself much more multidisciplinary. They made it much more a cross between electrical engineering, electronic materials, and the same thing I see happening in universities such as MIT and Cornell and others, where material science is now becoming much more interdisciplinary with nanomaterials, and it's a cross between bioengineering, bioscience, etc. I think what computer science needs to do is reposition itself at a university level as a curriculum, not just in creating software, but really enabling all the applications, enabling the mobile internet to happen, right? How do you bring content into the internet, and how do you bring? I think if we make it that way, then it becomes more of a exciting field to pursue rather than just, gee, I'm going to be an engineer doing software, sit in my cube all by myself, and that's really not glamorous. That's my perspective.
Well, again, we're going to have to stop the questions right now for Padmasree because we've got speakers on a schedule for the rest of the day. But we'll have plenty of time for more questions toward the end of the day. And Padmasree, thank you again for being with us.